Have you ever wondered what people really think about you when they believe you're beneath them? I did, and what I discovered shattered everything I thought I knew about the woman I was going to marry. My name is Marcus, and I'm about to share with you the most devastating yet eye-opening experience of my life. This is the story of how a single lie exposed truths I wish I'd never learned, but desperately needed to know. Let me take you back to where it all began, to that moment when I made a decision that would unravel my entire world. I had been dating Sarah for 2 years, the kind of relationship that felt like it was written in the stars. She was beautiful, successful, driven, and everything I'd ever dreamed of in a partner. We met at a charity gala, ironically enough, where I was one of the main donors, though she didn't know that at the time. Our connection was instant, electric, the kind that makes you believe in soulmates and destiny and all those things you used to roll your eyes at. Within 6 months, we were inseparable. Within a year, we were talking about forever. And at the 2-year mark, I proposed to her on a beach in Santorini, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that seemed to celebrate our love. She said yes without hesitation, tears streaming down her face, and I remember thinking that I was the luckiest man alive. But here's the thing about happiness. It can make you blind to warning signs, to subtle inconsistencies, to those little nagging feelings that something isn't quite right. Sarah came from what she called a comfortable family. Her parents lived in an upscale neighborhood, her father was a successful attorney, and her mother was involved in every prestigious charity and social club in the city. They had money, status, connections, all the things that mattered in their world. And from the very first time Sarah mentioned introducing me to them, I felt this knot forming in my stomach. Not because I was intimidated, I had grown up with wealth myself, the kind that you don't talk about, the kind that sits quietly in investment portfolios and real estate holdings passed down through generations. My grandfather had built a technology company in the 70s that he sold for an astronomical sum. My father had turned that money into even more through savvy investments and business ventures. By the time I was born, our family name was synonymous with wealth in certain circles, but we were taught early on to be humble about it, to never flaunt it, to understand that money was a tool and a responsibility, not a personality trait. But that knot in my stomach wasn't about money or status. It was about something Sarah had said in passing one evening, something that had lodged itself in my mind like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. We were watching a movie, some romantic drama where the poor guy falls for the rich girl, and Sarah had laughed and said, "I could never date someone who was struggling financially. I mean, I respect people who work hard, but I need someone who's on the same level, you know?" At the time, I had brushed it off, convincing myself it was just a thoughtless comment, that she didn't really mean it the way it sounded. After all, she had fallen in love with me not knowing about my family's wealth, right? I had always been low-key about money, drove a decent but not flashy car, lived in a nice but not extravagant apartment, worked as a consultant, which was true, but didn't reveal that I was consulting for my own family's various business interests. So when the time came to meet her parents, that comment kept echoing in my head, growing louder, more insistent, demanding attention. And that's when I made the decision that would change everything. I decided to test them, to see who they really were beneath the polished exterior and practiced smiles. I decided to lie about being poor, not homeless on the street poor, but struggling to make ends meet poor. I would present myself as someone who was working hard but hadn't quite made it yet, someone who was doing his best but still worried about making rent some months, someone who was, in their eyes, beneath their daughter's station in life. Looking back now, I can see how this decision was born from a place of deep insecurity, a fear that the love I had found was conditional, that it could evaporate the moment circumstances changed. But at the time, it felt like the only way to know the truth, to see past the masks we all wear, to understand if Sarah and her family would accept me for who I was rather than what I had. I crafted my story carefully, threading together enough truth to make it believable while weaving in enough fiction to paint myself as someone financially struggling. I told Sarah that my consulting work was actually just freelance projects that barely paid the bills, that my apartment was all I could afford, that my car was old, because I couldn't justify buying a new one when I was trying to save money, that my family had fallen on hard times years ago and we'd lost everything. I watched her face as I told her these lies, searching for any sign of judgment, any flicker of disappointment, any indication that this would change how she felt about me. And to her credit, at least in that moment, She seemed completely supportive, wrapping her arms around me and telling me that none of that mattered, that we would build our future together, that love was more important than money. I wanted so desperately to believe her, to accept those words at face value and abandon my deception right then and there. But something in the way she held me felt different, a slight stiffness that hadn't been there before, a distance in her eyes even as she smiled, a hesitation in her voice that betrayed some internal calculation happening beneath her reassurances. And that's when I knew I had to see this through, had to meet her family under this false pretense and discover who they really were, who Sarah really was when she thought I had nothing to offer but myself. The day I met Sarah's family for the first time under my fabricated circumstances is etched into my memory with painful clarity, every detail sharp and cutting like broken glass. Sarah had warned me that her parents could be a bit particular, that they had certain expectations that I should just be myself but maybe not mention the financial struggles too much unless they asked directly. That instruction alone should have been a red flag, but I was committed to seeing this through, to understanding the truth no matter how much it might hurt. We drove to their house on a Saturday afternoon, and I remember feeling my heart pounding so hard I thought Sarah might hear it over the sound of the radio. Their home was exactly what I had expected, a sprawling colonial in one of those neighborhoods where even the air feels expensive, where every lawn is perfectly manicured, and every house looks like it belongs in an architecture magazine. We pulled into their circular driveway and I took a deep breath, reminding myself to play my role convincingly. Sarah's father, Robert, answered the door with the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, the practiced greeting of someone who has mastered the art of appearing warm while remaining completely distant. He shook my hand with a grip that was just a bit too firm, a subtle assertion of dominance that I recognized immediately. Her mother, Patricia, glided into the foyer with the elegance of someone who has spent their entire life in country clubs and charity luncheons, her clothing immaculate, her jewelry understated but undoubtedly expensive, her expression one of polite interest that didn't quite mask the assessment happening behind her eyes. From the very first moment I could feel them measuring me, cataloging every detail of my appearance, from my off-brand shirt to my slightly worn shoes, from the way I spoke to the way I carried myself, searching for confirmation of whatever Sarah had told them about me. And then there was Sarah's brother Chad, a name so perfectly fitting for someone who radiated entitled arrogance that it would have been comical if it wasn't so predictable. He barely acknowledged me with a nod, his attention immediately returning to his phone, his body language screaming that I wasn't worth his time or attention. We moved into their living room, a space so perfectly decorated it felt more like a museum than a home, where every piece of furniture was positioned with mathematical precision, and every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that suggests a full-time cleaning staff. Patricia offered us drinks and I asked for water, a choice that I saw register on her face with a slight downturn of her lips, as if she had been hoping I would request something more sophisticated, something that would give her ammunition for whatever judgment she was forming. The conversation started with the usual pleasantries, questions about how Sarah and I met, how long we'd been dating, what I thought of the city, all delivered with smiles that felt increasingly plastic as the afternoon wore on. And then Robert pivoted to the questions I had been expecting, the ones designed to map out my financial landscape and determine my worthiness. He asked about my work, and I delivered my prepared story about being a freelance consultant, about how the work was inconsistent, but I was passionate about what I did, about how I was still building my client base and reputation. I watched his expression shift almost imperceptibly, a slight narrowing of his eyes, a barely noticeable tightening of his jaw, the kind of micro-expressions that reveal truth more reliably than words ever could. Patricia jumped in with questions about where I lived, and when I described my apartment in what I called an up-and-coming neighborhood, which is real estate speak for not yet gentrified, I saw her exchange a look with Robert, a silent conversation passing between them in a language developed over decades of marriage. Chad finally looked up from his phone long enough to ask what kind of car I drove, and when I told him, he actually laughed, a short bark of derision that he tried to cover with a cough. But the damage was done, the contempt was visible. Sarah squeezed my hand, a gesture that could have been supportive but felt more like a warning, a silent plea to not make waves, to accept their judgment quietly, to know my place. And that's when I started to really pay attention, not just to what they were saying but to what they weren't saying, to the glances and the pauses and the carefully constructed sentences, that revealed so much more than their words. Throughout that first dinner, I felt like an anthropologist observing a foreign culture, taking mental notes on every interaction, every subtle dig, every loaded comment that masqueraded as concern. Patricia asked about my family with the kind of tone that suggested she already knew the answer wouldn't be satisfactory, and when I explained that my parents had gone through some financial difficulties and we'd had to make significant lifestyle adjustments, I watched sympathy flash across her face for just a moment before being replaced by something else entirely, something that looked uncomfortably like relief, as if my family's struggles confirmed some theory she had been working with. Robert started offering unsolicited advice about financial planning and career development, speaking to me the way you might speak to a teenager who just doesn't understand how the world works, his tone condescending and paternalistic in a way that made my skin crawl. He talked about the importance of stability and security, about how a man needs to be able to provide for his family, about how love alone wasn't enough to build a life on, and I could see Sarah shrinking beside me, her shoulders tensing, her smile becoming more forced with each word her father spoke. But what really struck me was the difference in how they spoke to Sarah versus how they spoke to me. When addressing their daughter, their voices were warm, animated, full of genuine affection and interest. When they turned to me, something shifted, a cooling of tone, a formality that created distance, an undercurrent of judgment that poisoned every interaction. Chad made comments about how he couldn't imagine living paycheck to paycheck, about how he'd rather die than drive a car more than 3 years old, about how important it was to maintain certain standards, and each comment was like a needle, small enough to be dismissed individually but cumulatively creating a pattern of cruelty that was impossible to ignore. At one point, Patricia actually asked Sarah if she was sure about our relationship, if she had really thought through what it would mean to tie herself to someone in my position, and she asked this right in front of me, as if I wasn't sitting there, as if my feelings and dignity didn't matter, as if I was already so far beneath them that normal rules of courtesy didn't apply. Sarah defended me sort of in that weak, half-hearted way that makes you wonder if the defense is worse than silence would have been. She said that we loved each other and that's what mattered, but her voice lacked conviction, and she didn't meet my eyes when she said it, and I felt something crack inside my chest, a fissure in the foundation of everything I thought we had built together. The dinner dragged on for hours, each course bringing new opportunities for them to remind me of my place, to make subtle jokes about people who couldn't afford nice things, to tell stories about their friends and colleagues that emphasized wealth and success and status, creating a stark contrast with my fabricated circumstances. I played my role perfectly, humble and grateful, slightly uncomfortable but trying to fit in, asking questions about their lives and their work, complimenting their home and Patricia's cooking, doing everything right while my mind cataloged every slight, every judgment, every moment of casual cruelty. By the time we left, I was exhausted, not from the performance but from the emotional weight of what I had witnessed, from the growing realization that the family my fiancé came from was exactly what I had feared they might be, that their values were fundamentally at odds with everything I believed about human worth and dignity. In the car on the way home, Sarah was quiet, and when I asked if she thought it went well, she sighed and said her parents were just protective, that they would warm up to me eventually, that I needed to understand they only wanted the best for her, and I wanted to scream, to tell her that if their version of best required him to have money, then maybe we needed to reconsider everything. But I stayed silent, letting the lie continue, needing to see how deep this went. Over the following weeks, I continued to play the role of the struggling consultant, and I watched as my relationship with Sarah slowly transformed into something I barely recognized. The spontaneity we had once shared evaporated, replaced by careful calculations about what we could afford to do, where we could go, what activities fit within the budget of my fictional financial situation. Sarah started suggesting we stay in more often instead of going out, framing it as cozy and intimate, but I could see the disappointment in her eyes when her friends posted pictures of expensive restaurants and exotic vacations on social media. She began making comments about the future, about how we would need to really save and plan carefully, about how maybe we should wait a bit longer before getting married so we could get our finances in order, and each comment felt like a small betrayal, a confirmation that money mattered more than she wanted to admit. Her behavior toward me shifted in subtle ways that accumulated into something significant. She was less physically affectionate, as if poverty was somehow contagious or unattractive. She showed less interest in my work, asking fewer questions about my projects, her eyes glazing over when I talked about my day, as if the work of someone without money couldn't possibly be interesting or important. She started comparing me to her friends' partners, casual mentions of so-and-so's promotion or someone else's new business venture, comparisons that were supposedly innocent but carried an undercurrent of disappointment, a suggestion that I should be doing more, achieving more, earning more. I found myself becoming angry, not at the character I was playing, but at the reality I was uncovering, at the shallow values and conditional love that were being revealed with each passing day. But I pushed down that anger, channeling it into curiosity, into a determination to see this through to whatever bitter end awaited. Sarah's interactions with her family increased in frequency, and she started going to their house for dinners without me, saying they wanted some family time, that she didn't want to impose on me the discomfort of spending time with people who clearly didn't approve of our relationship. At first I accepted these explanations at face value, grateful for the respite from their judgment, but then I started wondering what they talked about when I wasn't there, what conversations happened behind closed doors, what plans and schemes were being hatched in my absence. One evening, Sarah came home from a dinner with her family, and she was different, distant, in a way that felt deliberate, like she had made some decision and was working up the courage to implement it. I asked her what was wrong, and she said everything was fine, but the lie sat between us like a third person in the room, invisible but undeniably present. She started spending more time on her phone, texting constantly, her face illuminated by the blue glow of her screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard with messages she angled away from my view. When I asked who she was talking to, she would say it was just work or just a friend, but the evasiveness in her tone told a different story. I noticed her pulling away emotionally, creating space between us that felt intentional, like she was preparing for something, building walls in anticipation of some future conflict or separation. And through it all, I maintained my performance, never breaking character, never revealing that I could afford to take her to any restaurant she wanted, buy her any gift she desired, provide the lifestyle she was apparently craving but thought was beyond our reach. I watched the woman I loved transform before my eyes. Or maybe I was just finally seeing who she had always been, the mask of unconditional love slipping to reveal the calculating pragmatist underneath. Then came the evening that changed everything, the moment when observation transformed into revelation and my worst fears were confirmed in ways I could never have anticipated. Sarah had gone to her parents' house for yet another family dinner, and I had declined the invitation, claiming I had work to finish. But really, I just couldn't stomach another evening of their thinly veiled contempt and patronizing concern. I stayed home, trying to distract myself with television and work emails, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was happening in my absence, that decisions about my life were being made without my knowledge or input. Around 9 o'clock, my phone rang, and I saw it was from a number I didn't recognize, but something compelled me to answer. It was Sarah's younger cousin, Emily, someone I had met briefly at a family gathering a few weeks prior. She was 19, still in college, and unlike the rest of Sarah's family, she had been kind to me, treating me like a human being rather than a problem to be solved. Her voice was urgent and apologetic when she spoke, telling me she wasn't sure if she should be calling, but she thought I needed to know what was happening, what she had overheard during a conversation that the family didn't realize she was listening to. My heart started racing, that familiar fight-or-flight response flooding my system, adrenaline sharpening my senses as I gripped the phone tighter. Emily told me that Sarah and her parents and Chad were all sitting in the living room, and she had been upstairs studying when she heard their voices drifting up through the air vents, the old house carrying sound in unexpected ways. She said she normally wouldn't eavesdrop, but she heard my name mentioned, and something in the tone made her stop and listen, made her pull out her phone and actually record some of the conversation, because she thought I deserved to know what they were saying about me behind my back. She sent me the audio file, and I sat there staring at my phone for several long moments, afraid to press play, terrified of what I would hear but needing to know, unable to turn away from the truth even though I knew it would hurt. I took a deep breath, hit play, and heard Sarah's mother's voice first, crystal clear and dripping with disdain. Patricia was saying that she simply couldn't understand what Sarah was thinking, that she had raised her daughter better than this, that there were so many suitable men out there from good families with real prospects, and here Sarah was wasting her time with someone who could barely afford to take her out to dinner. I heard Robert agree, his voice heavy with disappointment, saying that he had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to build their family's reputation and status to have his daughter throw it all away on someone with no ambition, no resources, no future. And then I heard Chad, his voice full of contempt, saying that his friends were making fun of him for having a future brother-in-law who drove a rust bucket and lived in what was basically a slum, that it was embarrassing for the whole family. But it was Sarah's voice that destroyed me, Sarah's words that cut deeper than all the others combined. Have you ever had someone you love completely betray you? Not with a single dramatic act, but with words that reveal they were never who you thought they were? Comment below and tell me about your experience, because I need you to understand that what I heard next didn't just break my heart, it shattered my entire understanding of love and trust and human nature. Sarah's voice came through the recording, and at first I thought maybe she would defend me. Maybe she would stand up to her family and prove that our love was stronger than their materialism and snobbery. For a brief, naive moment, I held on to that hope like a lifeline. But then she started speaking, and every word was a betrayal, every sentence a knife twisting deeper into my chest. She said she didn't know what she had been thinking when she accepted my proposal, that she had gotten caught up in the romance of it all. But now reality was setting in, and she was realizing that she couldn't live like this, that she had certain standards and expectations for her life that I simply couldn't meet. She talked about me like I was a mistake, an error in judgment, something to be corrected rather than someone to be loved. Her mother asked if she was planning to break off the engagement, and there was a long pause, a silence that stretched on forever while I held my breath waiting for her answer. Sarah said she wasn't sure how to do it without looking like the bad guy, without people judging her for leaving me because of money, that she needed to find a way to make it seem like we had grown apart naturally, like it was a mutual decision based on incompatibility rather than the truth, which was that she couldn't stomach the idea of marrying someone poor. Chad suggested she just ghost me, slowly pull away until I got the hint and ended things myself, and I could hear the laughter in his voice, the cruel amusement at my pain. Robert proposed something even more calculated, suggesting that Sarah could start creating situations where I would feel inadequate, where the gulf between our lifestyles would become so apparent that I would break things off myself to preserve my pride. That way she could play the role of the heartbroken fiancé whose love wasn't enough to overcome our differences. And Patricia, with her gentle, cultured voice, suggested that Sarah might want to start being seen with other men, appropriate men from good families, letting me know indirectly that I was being replaced, that I had been weighed and measured and found wanting. The conversation continued, my future being planned without me, my relationship being systematically dismantled by people who had decided I wasn't good enough to join their family. They talked about me like I was an object, a problem to be managed, never once considering that I had feelings or dignity or value beyond my bank account. Sarah agreed to their plan, said she would start pulling away gradually, that she would make excuses to see me less, that she would start mentioning her old boyfriend who had done so well in finance, that she would manufacture distance until breaking up seemed like the only logical conclusion. I heard her father congratulate her on being smart about this, on recognizing the mistake before it was too late to correct, and I heard her thank them for helping her see clearly, for reminding her what was really important in life. The recording ended, and I sat there in the silence of my apartment, my hands shaking, tears streaming down my face. My entire world collapsed into rubble around me. This was the woman I had planned to marry, the person I had imagined spending my life with, growing old with, building a family with, and she had just casually agreed to orchestrate the destruction of our relationship because I didn't have enough money, or rather because she thought I didn't have enough money because the lie I had told to test her had revealed a truth more ugly than I could have imagined. I felt sick, physically ill, my stomach churning with a mixture of grief and rage and betrayal so potent I thought I might actually vomit. But beneath the emotional turmoil, something else was growing. A cold, calculated fury, a determination to see this through to the end, to let them all reveal themselves completely before I showed them who I really was. In the days following that devastating revelation, I became someone I barely recognized, someone consumed by the need to understand the full scope of their deception and contempt. I couldn't confront Sarah immediately, couldn't let on that I knew about their conversation, because I needed to see how far they would take this, how thoroughly they would execute their plan to discard me like yesterday's trash. I watched Sarah implement their strategy with painful precision, and knowing what I knew made every action feel like a fresh betrayal. She started canceling plans at the last minute, claiming work emergencies or sudden headaches, her excuses growing more transparent with each iteration. She became less available, less engaged, responding to my texts hours later with brief, emotionless replies that felt like obligations being fulfilled rather than connections being maintained. She began mentioning her ex-boyfriend with increasing frequency, dropping his name into conversations with practiced casualness, talking about how successful he had become, how he had just bought a house in an exclusive neighborhood, how he had reached out to reconnect. Innocent enough statements individually but clearly designed to plant seeds of inadequacy in my mind. I played along perfectly, acting increasingly insecure and uncertain, giving her the reactions she expected, performing the role of the poor boyfriend, slowly realizing he wasn't good enough for his wealthy fiancé. But while I was playing my part, I was also investigating, digging deeper into who these people really were beneath their polished exteriors and respectable facades. I hired a private investigator, something I could easily afford with my real resources, and what he uncovered was disturbing in ways I hadn't anticipated. Sarah's family wasn't just classist and materialistic. They were calculated social climbers who had built their entire identity around status and appearances, who had carefully curated their image over decades, who viewed relationships as transactions and people as assets to be leveraged or liabilities to be eliminated. The investigator found that Robert's law practice specialized in protecting wealthy clients, and his entire network was built on maintaining access to money and power. Patricia's charity work wasn't about helping people, but about positioning herself among the city's elite, about being photographed at the right events with the right people, about maintaining the family's social standing. Chad had a history of bullying people he perceived as beneath him, with complaints filed at his workplace that had been quietly settled with money and NDAs. And Sarah, my beloved Sarah, had a pattern of dating men based on their financial prospects, a history of relationships that ended when someone better came along, a social media presence carefully crafted to showcase luxury and success, with me conspicuously absent from recent posts, as if she was already erasing me from her life. The investigator also uncovered something that made my blood boil. Sarah had reconnected with her ex-boyfriend weeks ago, had been meeting him for coffee and lunch, had been laying groundwork for her next relationship even while she was still engaged to me, still sleeping beside me at night, still accepting my love and affection while planning her exit strategy. Every discovery felt like peeling back another layer of deception, revealing rot that went deeper and deeper until I questioned whether anything about our relationship had been real, whether she had ever truly loved me, or if I had been an experiment, a rebellion against her family's expectations that she was now correcting by falling back in line. As I processed these revelations, I also started planning my response, thinking carefully about how I wanted to handle this situation, what outcome would provide the most justice while allowing me to maintain my dignity and integrity. I could have simply broken up with Sarah, walked away and never looked back, let them all believe their plan had worked, and I had skulked off in defeat. But something in me rebelled against that option. Some need for accountability, for them to understand that their cruelty had consequences, that they couldn't treat people this way without eventually facing the truth of who they really were. I decided I would reveal everything at the engagement party that Sarah's parents were planning, an event they had insisted on hosting despite their obvious disdain for me, probably seeing it as one last opportunity to parade their daughter before their wealthy friends before she inevitably broke things off with me. The party was scheduled for 3 weeks away, which gave me time to prepare, to gather evidence, to plan every detail of my revelation with the same careful calculation they had applied to my removal from their lives. I contacted my family's attorney and had him prepare documentation of my actual financial status, including holdings, assets, and investments that would make it impossible for them to deny or dismiss the truth. I collected every text message, every email, every piece of evidence that documented Sarah's pulling away and her secret meetings with her ex. I made copies of the recording Emily had sent me, ensuring it couldn't be deleted or denied, and I planned what I would say, rehearsing in my mind how I would dismantle their pretensions and expose their true nature in front of all the people whose opinions they valued so much. During those 3 weeks, Sarah continued her slow withdrawal, and I continued playing the confused, hurt boyfriend who couldn't understand why things were changing between us. We had conversations where I asked what was wrong, where I expressed my love and commitment, where I suggested couples counseling or working through whatever problems we were facing, and she would reassure me that everything was fine while her eyes told a different story, while her body language screamed that she was already gone, while her heart had moved on to someone who could provide the lifestyle she felt entitled to. I went to dinner with her family one last time, sitting through another evening of subtle insults and condescending advice, watching them perform their concern while knowing they were counting down the days until I would be out of their daughter's life, and they could proceed with finding her a more suitable match. Patricia talked about the engagement party, about how lovely it would be, about how important it was to celebrate this milestone in Sarah's life, and I could see the subtext in her smile, the knowledge that this party wasn't really about celebrating our engagement, but about performing family unity one last time before orchestrating its dissolution. Robert asked me about my work, feigning interest while clearly waiting for me to admit I was still struggling, still barely making ends meet, still unworthy of his daughter's hand in marriage. Chad ignored me entirely, his contempt now so established that he didn't even bother to hide it, treating my presence as an inconvenience to be tolerated rather than acknowledged. And Sarah sat beside me, her hand in mine, her smile in place, playing the role of the loving fiancé while plotting her exit, and I marveled at how convincing she was, how thoroughly she had learned to wear a mask, how completely she had absorbed her family's values of appearance over substance, performance over authenticity. The night of the engagement party arrived, and I dressed in my finest clothes. Not the cheap off-brand items I had been wearing for months, but actually high-quality garments from designers whose names her family would recognize, though I kept them subtle enough that they might not immediately notice the upgrade. I had everything prepared, my evidence organized on my phone, my speech rehearsed, my resolve steeled for what was about to unfold. Sarah picked me up, and I noticed her surprise at my appearance, a flicker of confusion crossing her face as she tried to reconcile my nicer clothing with the story she believed about my financial situation. I told her I had splurged on the outfit, that I wanted to look my best for such an important event, and she smiled, but I could see the discomfort in her eyes, the cognitive dissonance of seeing me in clothes that suggested I might have more resources than she had been led to believe. The party was being held at her parents' country club, naturally, a venue that screamed old money and exclusivity, with its pristine grounds and elegant ballroom and staff trained to be invisible until needed. We arrived to find the room already filling with guests, Sarah's family's friends and colleagues, all dressed impeccably, all carrying themselves with that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having worried about money or status or belonging. Sarah's parents greeted us at the entrance, and I could see Patricia's disapproval as her eyes swept over me, cataloging my appearance, searching for flaws to confirm her low opinion, but finding less ammunition than she had expected. Robert shook my hand with his usual too firm grip, and Chad appeared beside them with his girlfriend, a woman who looked at me with the same practiced disdain that seemed to be a family trait. The party proceeded with speeches and toasts, people congratulating Sarah and wishing us well, and every kind word felt like a lie. Every expression of joy felt hollow when I knew what was really happening beneath the surface. Sarah played her part beautifully, smiling and thanking people, holding my hand just tight enough to look committed but not so tight as to suggest genuine affection, performing the role of the happy bride-to-be while counting down the moments until she could discard me without social repercussions. I watched her family work the room, networking and schmoozing, collecting social capital like dragons hoarding gold, and I felt my anger crystallize into something cold and sharp, a determination to show all these people who valued appearances and status above human decency exactly what kind of family they were celebrating. When the time came for the formal toasts, Robert stood up first, giving a speech about his daughter finding love, about the importance of partnership and commitment, about how a marriage should be built on shared values and compatible life goals, and I could hear the subtext in every word, the coded messages about my inadequacy that everyone in this room would miss, but that I heard loud and clear. Patricia spoke next, talking about how she had always known Sarah would find her way, would make the right choices, would end up with someone who could give her the life she deserved, and again the implication was clear. I wasn't that person, and this engagement was a temporary aberration that would soon be corrected. Then it was my turn to speak, and I stood up slowly, feeling every eye in the room turn to me, feeling the weight of the moment settling on my shoulders like a heavy cloak. I began my speech with the expected platitudes, thanking everyone for coming, expressing my gratitude to Sarah's parents for hosting this beautiful event, talking about how much I loved Sarah and how excited I was for our future together. I saw them relaxing slightly, assuming I would follow the script, keep things simple and brief, not make waves or draw attention to myself beyond what was absolutely necessary. But then I pivoted, my tone shifting, my words taking on an edge that made people lean forward in their seats, sensing that something unexpected was about to happen. I said that before we went any further, I needed to share something important with everyone, something that I had discovered about the nature of love and relationships and what truly matters in life. I talked about how I had always believed that love should be unconditional, that if you truly cared about someone, you accepted them as they were, supported them through difficulties, stood by them regardless of circumstances. I said I had been fortunate to grow up in a family that taught me these values, that emphasized character over wealth, integrity over status, kindness over cruelty. And then I said that when I met Sarah's family, I wanted to know if they shared those values, if they would accept me for who I was rather than what I had, and so I had made a decision to test them, to present myself as someone struggling financially, to see how they would respond. The room went very quiet, the kind of silence that feels loud, that amplifies every breath and rustle of clothing, and I could see confusion and dawning realization spreading across faces throughout the crowd. Sarah's hand found my arm, gripping it tightly, her nails digging into my skin, and I could feel her panic radiating through that touch, could sense her understanding that everything was about to come crashing down. I continued, explaining that I wasn't actually poor, that my family had significant wealth, that I had resources and opportunities that most people could only dream of, but that I had chosen to present myself differently to understand who these people really were beneath their polished exteriors. I pulled out my phone and brought up the documentation my attorney had prepared, images showing holdings and assets and financial statements that made it impossible to deny the truth, and I saw jaws dropping, eyes widening, the collective shock of people realizing they had completely misjudged the situation. But I wasn't finished, not even close. I then talked about what I had discovered through my deception, how Sarah's family had treated me with contempt and condescension, how they had made subtle jokes and patronizing comments, how they had made it clear that I wasn't good enough to join their family based solely on my perceived financial status. I described the dinner conversations, the loaded questions, the thinly veiled insults, and I watched Patricia and Robert's faces drain of color, watched Chad shift uncomfortably in his seat, watched Sarah's hand drop from my arm as if I had suddenly become radioactive. And then I played the recording, Emily's audio file streaming through the room's sound system, every word of their private conversation laid bare for everyone to hear, every cruel comment and calculated strategy exposed to public scrutiny. The room listened in horrified silence as Sarah's mother talked about how she couldn't understand what Sarah was thinking, as her father expressed disappointment in his daughter's choices, as her brother made jokes about my poverty, and finally, devastatingly, as Sarah herself agreed to their plan to gradually push me out of her life, to manufacture situations that would make me feel inadequate until I broke things off myself. When the recording ended, the silence in the room was deafening. A collective held breath as everyone processed what they had just heard. I looked at Sarah, and her face was a mask of horror and shame, tears streaming down her cheeks, her mouth opening and closing but no sound coming out, as if she couldn't find words adequate to explain or defend what everyone had just witnessed. I looked at Patricia and Robert, and they were frozen, their carefully constructed personas shattered, their true nature exposed in the most public way possible, surrounded by friends and colleagues who would now forever associate them with the cruelty and calculating materialism revealed in that recording. Chad was staring at his phone, probably already crafting damage control messages, his usual arrogance replaced by something that looked uncomfortably like fear as he realized the social consequences of what had just been revealed. I turned back to address the room, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins, despite the emotional turmoil of publicly dismantling a relationship I had once believed in so deeply. I said that I had learned an important lesson through this experience, that money reveals character in ways few other things can, that how people treat those they perceive as having less power or status tells you everything you need to know about who they really are beneath the masks they wear. I said that I had discovered that the woman I thought I loved was a stranger, that the family I had hoped to join was built on values fundamentally opposed to everything I believed in, that the relationship I had invested 2 years of my life in was based on conditions and calculations rather than genuine connection and unconditional acceptance. I pulled the engagement ring off my finger, the symbol of a future that had been revealed as an illusion, and I placed it on the table in front of Sarah, the sound of metal hitting wood echoing through the silent room. I told her that I deserved someone who would love me regardless of my bank account, that I deserved a partner who would stand by me through difficulties rather than engineering my removal the moment things became inconvenient, that I deserved honesty and loyalty and genuine affection rather than performance and pretense. I told her parents that their values were hollow, that their obsession with status and appearances had created a family without genuine warmth or integrity, that their treatment of me revealed a poverty of spirit far more damaging than any financial struggle could ever be. I told Chad that his cruelty and arrogance were signs of deep insecurity, that people who truly have confidence and self-worth don't need to put others down to feel elevated, that his behavior was embarrassing, not for me, but for him. And then I addressed the room at large, thanking them for attending what had turned out to be not an engagement party, but a revelation, an exposure of truths that everyone needed to see, consequences that were long overdue for people who had spent too long believing they could treat others with impunity, as long as they maintained the right appearances. I apologized for disrupting their evening but said that sometimes disruption is necessary, that sometimes the only way to create change is to force people to confront uncomfortable truths, that sometimes you have to burn down the house to reveal what was rotting in the foundation all along. As I walked out of that country club, leaving behind the shocked silence and the whispered conversations already starting, leaving behind the relationship and the family and the future I had once envisioned, I felt a strange mixture of grief and liberation. The weight of the deception I had carried for months was lifted, replaced by the lighter burden of truth, painful as it was. I sat in my car for a long moment, my hands on the steering wheel, my breath coming in short gasps as the adrenaline began to fade, and the emotional reality of what I had just done crashed over me like a wave. I had lost the woman I loved, or at least the woman I thought I loved, the illusion of her that I had built up in my mind over 2 years of what I now understood was a fundamentally unequal relationship. But I had also gained something invaluable. I had learned who I was beneath the circumstances. I had discovered that my values and principles weren't negotiable, that my self-respect wasn't for sale regardless of how deeply I might care about someone. In the weeks that followed, the story spread through social circles like wildfire, the kind of gossip that people couldn't resist sharing, the dramatic public revelation that became legend through retelling. Sarah tried to reach out several times, leaving voicemails that ranged from angry to apologetic to desperate, but I never responded, understanding that there was nothing left to say, that the relationship had died, not in that moment at the party, but months earlier when she had agreed to her family's plan to discard me. I heard through mutual friends that her parents were furious, not at their own behavior but at me for exposing it, not at their values but at the consequences of those values being made public. Chad apparently became even more insufferable, doubling down on his arrogance as a defense mechanism against the shame of being revealed as the bully he had always been. And Sarah, according to people who knew her, withdrew from social events for a while, unable to face the judgment and gossip, the knowledge that everyone now saw her as shallow and calculating, that her carefully curated image had been destroyed in a single evening. I wish I could say I felt satisfaction at their discomfort, that revenge was as sweet as people claim it is, but mostly I just felt sad, mourning not what I had lost, but what I had never actually had, the genuine love and acceptance I had believed in, but that had never really existed. I threw myself into work, into rebuilding a life that wasn't defined by a relationship, into reconnecting with family and friends I had somewhat neglected during my time with Sarah. My parents were supportive but not surprised, my mother gently pointing out that she had always had reservations about Sarah and her family, that she had sensed something artificial in their interactions, that she had worried I was settling for someone who didn't truly value me. My father, ever practical, simply said that the situation had revealed important information, that it was better to discover someone's true character before marriage than after, that I should be grateful for the lesson even though the learning had been painful. Looking back now, months later, I can see the experience with some clarity, some perspective that distance and time provide. I don't regret the deception, even though it went against my natural inclination toward honesty and transparency, because it revealed truths that I needed to know, that would have remained hidden beneath politeness and pretense if I hadn't created circumstances that forced them into the light. I learned that love, real love, doesn't calculate or strategize, doesn't weigh and measure, doesn't come with conditions and exit strategies. I learned that people who truly value you will accept you in any circumstances, will see your worth independent of external factors like money or status or success. I learned that families pass down not just wealth and property, but values and beliefs, and that sometimes those inherited values are toxic, creating generations of people who prioritize appearance over substance, who treat relationships as transactions, who can't distinguish between a person's worth and their net worth. I learned that my own values, the principles I was raised with about treating people with dignity and respect regardless of their circumstances, weren't just abstract ideals, but fundamental parts of who I am, lines I won't cross even for love. And perhaps most importantly, I learned that I deserve better, that settling for conditional love out of loneliness or fear of being alone is a betrayal of self far worse than being betrayed by others. The experience changed me in ways both obvious and subtle. I'm more cautious now about who I trust, more attentive to the signs of conditional acceptance, more willing to test relationships in smaller ways before fully investing my heart and future. But I'm also more confident, more certain of my own worth, more comfortable being alone than being with someone who doesn't truly appreciate who I am. I've started dating again, carefully, selectively, with eyes wide open to red flags and warning signs I might have missed before. I've had conversations with new partners about values and priorities, about what matters in life and what kind of family they come from. Not because I'm damaged or overly suspicious, but because I've learned that these things matter, that they predict future behavior more reliably than chemistry or attraction, or even love. I've also become more vocal about calling out classism and materialism when I encounter it, more willing to challenge people who make judgments based on wealth or status, more committed to using my own privilege and resources to support values of equality and human dignity. The recording from that engagement party eventually made its way onto social media, despite my never sharing it myself, probably leaked by someone who was there and couldn't resist the drama of it all. It went viral for a few days, generating think pieces and opinion articles about class and relationships and the true meaning of love in a materialistic society. Some people praised me for exposing hypocrisy and standing up for my values, while others criticized me for deception and public humiliation, and I tried not to pay attention to either camp, knowing that strangers on the internet couldn't possibly understand the full complexity of the situation or the emotional cost of what I had done. So here I am now, sharing this story with you, with the hope that maybe it resonates with your own experiences, maybe it helps you see some relationship or situation in your own life with new eyes, maybe it gives you the courage to demand better for yourself. Have you ever been through something similar, where someone's true nature was revealed in a way that changed everything? Have you ever had to make the painful decision to walk away from someone you loved because their values were incompatible with yours? Have you ever felt the sting of being judged for superficial reasons? Of having your worth measured by external factors rather than who you are as a person? I want to hear your stories, your experiences, your reflections on what this story brought up for you. Drop a comment below and share your thoughts, because these conversations matter. Because sharing our experiences helps us understand we're not alone in facing these challenges. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is speak our truths and create space for others to speak theirs. And if this story touched your heart, if it made you think or feel or question something you've been taking for granted, please hit that like button. I know it seems like a small thing, but it tells me that this story mattered, that sharing my pain and my lesson was worthwhile, that maybe in some small way my experience can help others navigate their own complicated relationships and difficult decisions. I also want to take a moment to talk about why understanding this content is so important, not just for entertainment or drama, but because it addresses fundamental questions about human relationships and values that affect all of us. We live in a society that constantly sends messages about the importance of wealth and status, that measures success in dollars and possessions, that treats people as more or less valuable based on their economic circumstances. And these messages seep into our relationships, influencing who we date, who we marry, who we allow into our inner circles, who we deem worthy of our time and affection. But real connection, the kind that sustains us through life's inevitable difficulties and changes, can't be built on such shallow foundations. Real love requires seeing and accepting the full human being in front of you, messy and imperfect and wonderful, regardless of their bank account or social status. Understanding this, really internalizing it, can protect you from the kind of pain I experienced, can help you identify red flags earlier, can give you the strength to walk away from relationships that don't serve your highest good. It can also make you a better partner yourself, more aware of your own biases and conditions, more committed to offering the unconditional acceptance you hope to receive. This is why I'm asking you to subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales, because the stories we share here aren't just entertainment. They're lessons wrapped in narrative. They're warnings and wisdom delivered through the experiences of people who have lived through difficult situations and emerged with something valuable to offer others. Every video on this channel is designed to make you think, to challenge your assumptions, to help you navigate the complex landscape of human relationships with more awareness and intention. And when you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, you're not just supporting a channel. You're joining a community of people committed to growth and truth and authentic connection. People who believe that sharing our stories makes us stronger and wiser collectively. So please take a moment right now to subscribe to my Truth Revealed Tales. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective or help you through your own difficult situation. Thank you for watching, for listening, for being part of this community. Thank you for giving me a space to share my story, painful as it was to relive and articulate. And thank you for understanding that beneath the drama and the revelation and the public confrontation, this story is really about the universal human need to be seen and valued for who we truly are, to be loved without conditions, to find people who will stand by us not because of what we have, but because of who we are. That's the truth I revealed. And that's the truth I hope you carry with you into your own relationships and life choices.